Welcome into another edition of Where the 99 Lead. It's a program brought to you by the University of Pikeville, where we talk all things regarding the University of Pikeville. I'm Andrew Joyce, your host, and special guest today on this edition of Where the 99 Lead, Basil Clark. It's a familiar name at the University of Pikeville. He is the Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the University of Pikeville. Of course, the University of Pikeville's historic 99 steps, leading from campus back into the community and throughout the world. The University of Pikeville certainly teaches and reaches all of those. Basil Clark, a familiar name on campus. A lot of former students, Pikeville College, University of Pikeville, they know the name, and now some folks that may not have a chance to meet you. Welcome to this edition of Where the 99 Lead.
Thank you.
Want to learn a little about Basil Clark. For those that don't know, let's have some biography and how you arrived at the University of Pikeville, how long you've been there.
Well, maybe I should start with something that some people even up there may not know.
Let's do.
I started out as a high school dropout twice.
Wow.
And then went into the military, and in the military was encouraged to get my GED.
Sure.
And I stayed 8.5 years in the military. I served a little over a year in Vietnam in the infantry.
Uh-huh.
And then after that was in Germany for 5 years. And it was in Germany then that I made the decision I was going to get out and go to college.
Right.
So by that time I had my GED and I started college and eventually wound up with what turned out to be a good match for what, at the time, Pikeville College was looking for, which was someone to teach speech and theater.
Right.
And I had the master's from UK in theater and one from Moorhead in communication. So that just came together at the right time.
Perfect fit.
Came up here in 1991. So I've been here a little while.
Been here a little while, and you've seen a lot of changes.
Yes, I have.
Let's talk about the changes when you arrived in 1991 to where the University of Pikeville now is in 2013. Talk about some of the changes that have been significant to Basil Clark.
Well, I just think overall we saw a move that was a lot of non-traditional students, and then we started having more of the traditional students. Now we're seeing a little bit of a move the other direction again. Not that much, but we still have a lot more non-traditional than we did, say, maybe 6 years ago, I believe. And some of the veterans coming back, and that, for me, has been good to connect and talk with common experiences with some of them. Of course, there's a lot of changes in terms of the buildings and the facilities, and they have all been good. And with President Patton and the incoming President Hurley, just the changes in recruiting, I think an overall atmosphere has made it more of a university setting. People feel like, we are on the move.
University of Pikeville, of course, the leading university of Central Appalachia. Talking with Basil Clark, Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the university, and a facility that we can all be proud of, and that's Booth Auditorium. And teaching speech and theater in particular, it's certainly a great part of the university campus, Booth Auditorium. Seen you on stage there a couple of times. We want to talk about some of that coming up in just a little bit, but outside of that, let's talk about some of the classes that you teach, and how do those classes enrich the student experience at the University of Pikeville?
Well, primarily, I still work with public speaking and appreciation of theater.
Yes.
I've also taught some interpersonal communication courses and health communication, political comm, and the comm theory. But I have found that I really, really enjoy just working with the fundamentals of public speaking and appreciation of theater, those basic level courses that help the students either enter into the term appreciation of theater,
Sure.
or in terms of public speaking, working on the comfort level.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've really tried to stress with students in public speaking is getting more comfortable.
Right.
We have to know the organization. We have to get immersed in the topic and all that.
Right.
But if you're not comfortable, then it doesn't work real well.
Yes.
I remember several years ago watching someone who was an expert in biblical archaeology.
Right.
And while he was talking, I was thinking to myself, what a shame. This man is a wealth of information,
Right.
but he couldn't get it out there.
Sure.
And so I talk with students about the paradox of getting behind the lectern, and for most of them, that is the uncomfortable place.
Right.
And the paradox of life is that the only way to get more comfortable is you have to keep getting into the uncomfortable place.
Sure.
And keep doing that until you get more comfortable. And I just enjoy that. It's, I don't know, you ever cut the grass and you look back and you say, look at this grass I just cut. This looks
That's a
nice.
nice looking lawn.
Yeah. And you can see many, many times students who come in that are scared. Some are comfortable to begin with.
Sure.
But some that come in that are scared, and they would not be taking that course if it were not a requirement for
Right.
graduation. And then by the end of the semester, you see them more comfortable. And I like that.
Yeah, sure. Some might ask the question, why is public speaking a required course? But as you mentioned, you've got someone who's extremely educated in their field that can't get a point across. And the same goes in the business world, in the medical field, whatever the case may be. They need to have that comfort level to speak in front of people about their topic, whatever the subject matter may be, whatever their major may be. It is very important. Read a survey once that the greatest fear of most people is public speaking. When you encounter a college freshman on that first day of class in August, you've been at it long enough to know which of those students are going to be the biggest challenge for you. As you said about the cut grass, which one's going to be the tallest grass, and they'll have the longest way to come. Are you able to see that on day one?
Not always,
Yeah.
not always, but sometimes you can tell someone does not really want to be there. And it's usually not the incoming freshman either, because it's a 200 level course.
Okay.
So, and they have to have English 111, 112, get that organization behind them. But still, I've had cases of people that have put it off until their senior year.
Yes.
And then once they take the course, they start to say, I wished I'd taken this earlier because it would have helped in some of my other courses.
Sure.
But you sometimes can pick out the people. I usually have a speech early on called The Worst You Can Do. And the object behind it is to get up and give the, pardon my grammar, the baddest speech you can.
Right.
And just make it really bad. And incorporate all the things that you wouldn't do if you wanted to have a good speech, but you don't want to have a good speech.
Sure.
And even there, you can sometimes see the people that are really uncomfortable. But in the process of doing that, they focus on trying to have a bad speech, and many times have a really, really good speech.
Sure.
And so you start to pick out the ones that you need to work with. Maybe there's a natural shyness, and you have to try to bring
Right.
them out of that. And it's a process. You don't do it in just one semester.
Sure.
Takes
How
time.
satisfying is it for you to see one of those students who enter your public speaking course, and they're one of those tough cases? Maybe it's a shyness. Maybe it's just simply the fear of public speaking. How satisfying is it for you to see them overcome that? And I know you probably have several examples, and then to see them walk across that stage at graduation.
Well, it is satisfying. I mean, it feels good that you feel like in some small way you've been able to contribute to a positive direction in their life. We're just one little cog in the big wheel, but it's good to be a part of that wheel.
Absolutely. Changing our world. one public speaking course at a time. Basil Clark, Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the University of Pikeville, our guest on this edition of Where the 99 Lead. We talk about, of course, the speech and theater classes at the University of Pikeville, but also Mr. Clark, you're currently on sabbatical from the university and writing your second book. Talk about your first book before we get to the second, Poetic Healing, a Vietnam Veteran's Journey from a Communication Perspective. Let's hear a little about that.
Well, several years ago, we had a professor that was up 1 year and then had an opportunity to go back to Minnesota, where he came from, and teach up there. But he was here 1 year, and we became good friends, and we were talking about Vietnam and some of the poetry I'd just been working on. And as we talked, at one point I handed him this file and a lot of handwritten poetry, some typed, and I said, I guess this is my story in a nutshell. And so he asked if he could read through it, and one of the things that he said he was seeing was a bit of a pattern. And he was real big. Mark Hugelin is the co-author of the book. He's real big into theory and what's going on here. And he felt like this fit into a communication theory of healing. And so we started to categorize the poetry, even though it wasn't necessarily written in that sequence.
Sure.
From where there's an inner wounding of sorts, and then how you go through a process of anger, and then kind of burning out some of the garbage, I guess you could say,
Sure.
and moving into a point of healing. And part of that came from I have this loud, continual ringing in the ears, tinnitus. A lot of people are familiar with it. I've had it over 43 years now in both
Right.
ears. And it was a case where it really, say 10 years after the war, so it really, really started to get me down. And I went through, I'd say 10 to 15 years after Vietnam was probably my time of going through that post-traumatic stress, even though I wasn't aware of it
Right.
at the time. But I was doing a lot of writing. And so Mark worked with the theory that what I was doing in the writing was trying to wrestle with some of
Right.
the things bothering me. And then when I was a student at University of Kentucky, I was in a playwriting course, and I worked on a play that was roughly autobiographical. And I found that that was almost a purging process for me, as I was able to get some of the things down. And then actually in 2009, so some 40 years after the event,
Sure.
up at the University of Minnesota Crookston, they put on that play.
Right.
And invited me up to be the guest playwright, plus play the part of the main character, which was roughly autobiographical of myself. Worst, or the hardest play that I've ever worked on, because to develop a character,
Yes.
you have to get inside the person, try to feel what they're feeling. And I had moved through a lot of my writing
Right.
past some of these things, but
So you
then
had to
on
take
stage to recreate all of that again, particularly with a close friend that had been killed, and recreate that on stage. I just experienced what a difference 40 years in a lot of writing makes.
You had to take yourself back to those
Back to
times
that.
and relive those times.
Right.
Let's get a look at the book, Poetic Healing, a Vietnam Veteran's Journey from a Communication Perspective, and it's written by Basil Clark. If we can get a look at that there. Would you say this is a compilation of your poems that you wrote through those many processes of healing?
Some of them.
Some of those are
Some
there.
of them. Yeah, it's not all of them were in there, but put together quite a few
Right.
From that point, and a lot of them dealt with not only the war, but then questions about the war,
Sure.
questions about God, patriotism. I went through all those phases. as I was trying to make sense out of some things.
I would imagine this book would be something that someone who spent time in Vietnam, a lot of Vietnam veterans out there, it's something that they could relate to, a lot of the same experiences that they may have shared with you.
Right, and particularly if they're interested in the why am I feeling this way?
Right.
What's going on? After we did the play up in Minnesota, 3 years ago now, 4 years after we did the play up there were a lot of veterans that turned out.
Right.
It was in late March. It was below freezing. It was snowy. And they had a packed auditorium, 400 people in that auditorium.
It's incredible.
And a lot of veterans afterwards were talking about how that helped them.
Talking with Basil Clark, Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the University of Pikeville, and you're tuned to Where the 99 Lead. You're currently working on a book titled War Wounded, Let the Healing Begin. As an author, what's the message or theme of this new book, and how is it different than the first book, Poetic Healing?
Well, the first book was in conjunction with Mark and the theory, what was going on with me.
Right.
This one is dealing more from the angle of war wounded, not just from the military wars, but all kinds of woundings that people have.
Sure.
Things that happen inside, be it emotional abuse, physical abuse that people may go through, loneliness, rejection. I think self-sufficiency can be a kind of a wounding at times.
Right.
Losses, just a lot of things that go on. Actually, if you don't mind, I have a poem that I wrote that is to the acrostic of War Wounded, Let the Healing Begin.
Very good. While you read that poem, we'll get a shot of the cover of War Wounded, or the working cover, Let the Healing Begin, written by Basil Clark.
Yeah. It's War Wounded, Let the Healing Begin. And as it's written, of course, the acrostic format is then each line begins with a letter of that title.
Right.
So wars come in a myriad of shapes and sizes, and frequently the lingering scars remain unseen in our minds. So what are some of the ways we can usually receive wounds and other not-so-nice damages from? Experiences come in diverse manners, lots of different ways, even sometimes from the things others didn't think were such a big deal. Harassment and other forms of emotional abuse all have their places on the list too. By the way, everyone has some form of woundedness. A part of what goes along with this life, it seems, is that there is no one exempt from getting hurt somehow. But there's also hope for everyone. There are ways to grapple with the past and look into the future and find new ways to forge ahead. One of the things that I work with on that is the idea. I have a poem that's in the Poetic Healing, and I have it reprinted in this one too then. Some folks kill themselves. And it goes, some folks kill themselves by hanging, some folks use a gun, others kill themselves by living, waiting till it's done.
Right.
And there are a lot of people that have these inner wounds, things that have dragged them down, and they can't get beyond that. And
Sure.
so I've done interviews with many people that have had some pretty horrendous things happen. A couple that lost 2 children to cystic fibrosis,
Sure.
For example. People that have had sudden, I guess what you would call shock losses that they weren't expecting. Illnesses. People that may have illnesses that keep them from being able to participate as much as they would like to in some activities.
Right.
People can't see that maybe on the inside. And so they wonder, well, why is this person behaving this way, or reacting in a certain manner? And so this is looking at ways people have coped with things and move on in a lot of different directions.
It's called War Wounded, Let the Healing Begin. And it sounds like it's something that all of us could read if we've suffered those types of hurts, those losses. We've all been wounded. We all have scars. Talking with Basil Clark, Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the University of Pikeville. Someone told me you'd written over 93,000 words and are currently interviewing people. Talk about the process of writing a book.
Well, it's interesting because this one is not like writing a novel where if you're writing a story that is fictional, you've probably heard the expression before. People say, well, I just follow the characters around.
Yes.
And I write down what they're doing. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Right.
I have discovered that that also happens with this. I started off with a certain direction, and I was going to try to interview here, there, and yonder. And then I just got connected with different people, and sometimes one interview led to another. And so it's been an interesting process there. Now, I'm no longer up to 93,000 because just last week...
Let's have a new count.
I'm back down to about 85.
Edit, chop?
Last week was a real turning point for me. It was like, okay, I'm done with a lot of the writing, just writing any direction.
Right.
And by the way, Dr. James Riley up at UPike told me one time when I was working on a book, he said, just write. Don't worry about the grammar. Don't worry about the editing. Just write. Later you can go back and edit. And so up to this point, that's a lot of what I've been doing. Now I'm starting to get into the editing process, and so probably the next third will be a few more interviews, and then trying to focus, which direction are you going for sure. And then, of course, the last part of it will be getting the publisher and getting it published.
There you go. You're on sabbatical now. You'll finish the book. You'll be back at UPike in the classroom in the fall.
Well, I'm teaching one class as an overload,
Okay.
so I come up every Monday evening and have a class from 6 to 8:30, appreciation of theater.
Right.
And then my wife has a house in Chattanooga, so I am spending a lot of my time there, and then we come up here sometimes for a week or so. So we're back and forth between the two places.
But you're going to be back in the classroom.
Oh, yes.
Okay. We just want to make sure we're not letting go of it. We've talked about Basil Clark in the classroom, in public speaking courses, and as an author. You're known in the community for your character monologues. What's a monologue? First of all, define a monologue for us, and some of the characters you portray.
Well, in a play, you'll have a monologue where a character is speaking a long segment, and sometimes it's explaining maybe a little bit about themselves. A character monologue is where it's only that character, and they are then sharing their life with the audience.
Sure.
So some of the characters, I don't know if I can remember them all here, but I do 3 presidential: Abraham Lincoln,
Yes.
General Ulysses Grant, President Grant,
Right.
and President James Garfield, and then a historical character, Dr. Thomas Walker, who was the first person to document the existence of coal in Kentucky.
Right.
And then I do 10 biblical characters: Adam, Moses, Jephthah, Solomon, Nebuchadnezzar, Barabbas. Actually, I have another book that is publisher ready, and I've already been talking with someone on that, called Barabbas, which came out of that character monologue.
Wow.
But the fictional account, and Paul, and putting together some other characters that are in the works.
Interesting. Why did you choose those particular historical icons?
I'd say random, but I'm not sure as anything in life is random
I'm going to
at
feel
all.
nothing Basil Clark does is random.
No, actually the first one I ever put together was President James Garfield.
Yes.
And he's now retired, but Professor John Scott was listening to one of these Kentucky Chautauquas, and he popped his head in my office door and he said, you know, I just came from one of these not too long ago, and I thought of you. Is why don't you do President Garfield? And so I took that as a trigger, a little nudge.
Right.
Actually, Wayne Rutherford called me one time, asked if I had anything on Abraham Lincoln, and I said, well, when do you want it by?
Yes.
So that's how I put that one together.
Right.
It's just been different characters that at some point interest me.
You mentioned Pike County Judge Executive Wayne Rutherford. Do you have Lincoln? And when do you need it? What does it take to put together a monologue of one of these characters, a time frame, the research? What does it take for you to put that together?
It varies depending on what you're doing. On the Lincoln one, there were certain things that we wanted to have included, part of the House divided speech, Gettysburg
Right.
Address, a little bit of his background and information there. The basic monologue, and I've revised it some since then, but that got put together in a couple weeks of part-time fooling around with it. Solomon, the one that I work with now, and I may do a Solomon 1 and a Solomon 2,
Right.
but the one I work with now is segments from Ecclesiastes, and I use the New International Bible and then a little bit of commentary
Yes.
throughout it, but that pretty much follows Ecclesiastes
Wow.
through. So, and then some of them you just read the background of the person. In the case of President Grant, his memoirs contain a lot of information about his life, so I've been able to use some from his memoirs.
We've seen you actually perform these monologues, or I've seen occasion, and very interesting. And maybe we could get a brief section of one of your theater classes in, say, 90 seconds. How does Basil Clark get into character for one of the monologues?
Well, you need to find ways that you identify with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I have pretty much determined is that with characters in theater, we could look at any person in the world, and if that was a character we had to play, we could find a little bit of that person inside ourselves.
Sure.
We might not want to find it there,
Right.
but we could find a little bit of that person inside ourselves. And so we have to look for where we identify, where we can empathize with that character, and then what are the goals or what are the objectives. So I like to, with the biblical characters, for example, bring them to life, bring out the humanness of these people and their hopes and fears and concerns that they had too.
There's one character that you haven't performed. Who would it be?
You suggest it, and I may work on it. One of the ones that I want to work on is Peter.
Would be incredible.
And part of that is because
Judas.
he's possibly, but one of the things with Peter is his humanness, his
Right.
failures, but still being able to be used.
I think we can all relate to Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Basil Clark, Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the University of Pikeville, our guest on this edition of Where the 99 Lead. We should do another show. One of the most interesting characters on the University of Pikeville campus. Currently, one book has been published, Poetic Healing, and another on the way. It's called War Wounded, Let the Healing Begin. Mr. Clark, thanks for being our guest on this edition.
Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Basil Clark, Associate Professor of Speech and Theater at the University of Pikeville, our guest on this edition of Where the 99 Lead. On behalf of the University of Pikeville, I'm Andrew Joyce, your host. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Where the 99 Lead, brought to you by the University of Pikeville, the leading university of Central Appalachia.